Hello and welcome, this is Mouse Gunner, and in this video I'm going to go over a list of what I consider to be the best mechs due to launch in the upcoming BattleTech video game for beginners. To support my choices, I'll be using data from the tabletop game that will not be a perfect representation of the performance or attributes of the mechs in question once they are in the video game due to some variation between the tabletop game and the video game, but should still give a broad understanding of the capabilities of each mech and their strengths. Because I'm using the tabletop game statistics, these choices are still relevant to people looking to get into the tabletop game as well. As much as this is a recommendation for newer players, it is not meant to teach you the basics of the game, and the information in this video will be delivered in a technical way. The purpose of this video is to explain why these mechs are good and what their specific strengths and weaknesses are, which does require a certain level of complexity to do. With my choices, I focused on 3 attributes that I felt would contribute to easing new players into the complex systems of BattleTech while still giving them a satisfying experience. I looked for mechs that were cool running so that new players wouldn't have to worry overly about heat buildup, while at the same time still outputting decent damage so that their attacks feel impactful. Nothing encourages a learning player more than the feeling that the result of their actions are significant and damage to their enemies can be the most obvious outcome of these actions. Going along with this theme, a new player can feel the weight of the consequences of mistakes and be discouraged by this. To guard against this, I emphasized armor protection to mitigate the effects of incoming damage as much as possible. Unfortunately, this is not a trio of attributes that is found easily, as with the design of most mechs, there is an element of give and take. To be good in one area often means that another area must be sacrificed. For the sake of this list, I tried to choose mechs which sacrificed attributes I felt would be less important to a new or inexperienced player. The sorting of this list is done partly by the role that I feel each mech can fill, but is mostly in the order of my choosing, with no particular rank assigned to any mech on the list, with some alternatives given. I'll be using the statistical data I covered in my previous video as a representation of the abilities of each mech. I go into greater detail of these stats in that video, but to explain briefly for those that have not seen the video, there are 4 stats. Max damage per ton, which is the maximum total damage of all weapons fired together divided by the weight of the mech in tons. Adjusted damage per ton, which averages the damage inflicted by missile weapons to give a more realistic rather than ideal comparison of a mech's ability to do damage. Heat efficiency is the amount of heat sinks a mech has divided by the heat a mech generates by firing all weapons without factoring in movement-generated heat. And finally, armor per ton, which is points of total armor on the mech divided by the mech's weight in tons. The first mech on this list is an outstanding mech in its own right. A member of the light mech class, the Commando is a great introduction to a mech that can serve in the scout role. The Commando, at 25 tons, has a walking movement of 6 and running movement of 9, making it average in mobility on the ground among its class. But lacking jump jets, a common feature in its weight class, does put it at a relative disadvantage when considering overall mobility. Armed with an SRM-6, SRM-4, and a single medium laser, the Commando can bring a surprising amount of damage to bear on its opponent for being such a light mech, producing a max damage per ton of 1 and adjusted damage per ton of 0.72. The heat efficiency of 100% means the Commando is generally a cool running mech with only movement or other outside circumstances generating heat in excess of what the heat sinks can handle. Armor per ton is average for its class at 2.56, and although not bad for a mech this light, a new player will have to learn at some point that even well-armored light mechs cannot stand up to a direct volley from heavier mechs. This is an important part of learning the scout role. The Commander will dish out satisfying levels of damage to your opponent, but is by no means meant to slug it out with the enemy. Light mechs must be kept moving to make them harder to hit and preferably in a position to not be hit at all. The sacrifice made for this firepower is mobility. Other light mechs will in general have an edge over the Commando in this regard, so looking for escape routes from the enemy will be all the more important when commanding a Commando than other scout mechs. But this downside is not a severe one, all things considered. Otherwise, the only other negative is the reliance on ammunition-bound weapons that could make longer engagements problematic, and the threat of ammunition explosions is always a deadly one. An alternative scout mech that does meet some of the requirements of a beginner-friendly mech is the Locust. Good overland mobility and a very cool running mech, unfortunately it can leave a player feeling impotent as it does okay damage for its weight, but against heavier mechs it can seem underwhelming, and due to its short range will require the Locust to get very close to use effectively, requiring patience and good positioning to survive an attack run. With that being said, some variant loadouts will give the Locust a degree of flexibility engaging targets. The Hunchback at 50 tons has a walking speed of 4 and running speed of 6, which is below average for its class and also has no jump jets. Firepower consists of an AC-20, 2 medium lasers, and a small laser, producing both a max and adjusted damage per ton of 0.66. This is strong damage for a medium weight mech, although dependent mostly on a single weapon, the firepower can resultingly be very hit or miss, as an AC-20 shot that fails to land throws a significant amount of the possible damage of the mech out the window. Add to this the limited ammunition for the AC-20, and the pilot of the mech will have to pick their shots carefully so as not to waste the precious damage. The heat efficiency of 93% means that the Hunchback is generally cool running and able to keep firing for a decent amount of time before running into any possible problems. Armor protection is outstanding at 3.2 armor points per ton, although the pilot of a Hunchback will have to keep in mind the forward bias of the armor allocation. Frontal armor is very good, but rear armor is rather thin, making it extremely important to avoid flanking attacks against the mech. The combination of strong protection and threatening firepower recommend the Hunchback highly for the role of a frontliner. Its job is to draw the attention away from more vulnerable mechs in the Lance, absorbing incoming fire from the enemy so they don't have to. Although a great representative of the frontline role, the Hunchback is not without its faults. Lack of mobility can cause havoc with the positioning of the lance of a commander, lacking proper discipline, putting the Hunchback too far back to effectively protect its lance mates in the early stages of an engagement. Firepower that cannot reach out beyond medium ranges can also put the Hunchback at a disadvantage against a highly mobile, skirmishing, and flanking enemy, frustrating the mech by picking away at it at long range and dancing away or attacking from behind where it is vulnerable. This is where cooperation from its lance mates can be important, helping watch the Hunchback's back while it works to protect them in turn. A good companion to the Hunchback, the 50-ton Centurion also has a walking speed of 4 and running of 6 with no jump jets. Armament consists of an AC-10, a LRM-10, and 2 medium lasers, producing a max damage per ton of 0.6 and adjusted damage per ton of 0.52. Although not as much damage as the Hunchback, the Centurion bears a more diverse group of weapons, allowing it to engage at various ranges. In particular, its long-range firepower of an AC-10 and LRM-10 allows it to multi-role somewhat effectively as a support mech. Ample ammunition stores for the LRM and autocannon keep the weapons running as well. Heat efficiency is the weakest of any mech on this list at 77%, but is still quite good and will teach the player how to effectively stagger the fire of mechs with different range brackets, without punishing them too hard if they want to alpha strike every so often. Armor protection is decent, with an armor per ton of 2.72, although weaker than is ideal for a frontline mech, it is strong enough to serve in that role when facing light to medium weight opponents. Its flexibility and multi-role nature is the strong suit of the mech, with lack of mobility being its main drawback. A variant of the Centurion swaps out the AC-10 for a large and small laser. The addition of heat sinks makes it have a similar heat profile to the standard variant. The addition of more armor comes at the cost of a slight reduction of long-range firepower, pushing the Centurion a little further into the frontline role, but still having the flexibility to work in the support role if needed. Alternatives to the Centurion or Hunchback can be found in the Enforcer or Blackjack, both of which gain in mobility with the use of jump jets. The Blackjack, through the use of strong medium-range firepower, is not a bad performer, having equal armor to the Centurion, with the ability to do a little bit of long-range damage through a pair of AC-2s. The Enforcer is slightly better armored than the Centurion, but that extra armor and mobility comes at the cost of firepower and endurance and ammunition for the autocannon. Mechs like the Wolverine and Shadowhawk may be tempting at first glance due to their good mobility, armor, and heat efficiency, but both produce a low damage per ton numbers, with the Wolverine at an adjusted damage per ton number of 0.33 and the Shadowhawk at 0.29. To round out a Lance loadout, you need a support mech, and although the Centurion can serve in that role, it would be nice to have another dedicated support mech in the Lance. The problem is support mechs tend to require more advanced play. Their strong firepower usually bringing with it poor heat efficiency if used improperly, and generally their weaker armor protection means if they are caught out of position, they may take heavy damage. As a result, I have made a compromise by assigning a mech that has some multi-role ability and the 45-ton Vindicator. With a walking speed of 4 and running of 6, the on-ground mobility is below average for a mech of this weight, but a jumping movement of 4 allows the mech to navigate rougher and elevated terrain more effectively. Armed with a PPC, medium and small laser, and an LRM-5, damage is respectable at a max per ton of 0.51 and adjusted damage per ton is 0.47. Most of the firepower of the Vindicator is focused at long-range engagements, depending on mainly the PPC with the aid of the LRM-5. This is not outstanding supporting fire at range, but can do the job in light and medium weight engagements. It will require a direct line of sight to utilize effectively, as the single LRM being fired indirectly is not sufficient to serve as adequate support. Heat efficiency is good at 100%, and considering the differing range brackets, it is not as likely max heat will be generated, although heat from the jump jets will need to be factored in when the mech jumps. Either way, the Vindicator should be a cool running mech unless deliberately pushed, and even then, heat should be manageable. Having a strong armor per ton of 3.2, the Vindicator out-armors the Centurion despite being the lighter mech. This allows the mech to fill the frontline role insofar as absorbing incoming damage. Its weaker short-range firepower due to the minimum range penalties of firing the PPC and LRM-5 in close does limit the Vindicator's ability somewhat to be a significant threat in that role. This is, in my opinion, the Vindicator's main weakness. Its long-range firepower falls a little short of a dedicated support mech, but its lack of short-range firepower is not enough of a threat to effectively protect more vulnerable mechs in the frontline role. That being said, the Vindicator can be a good tool to learn effective positioning for a support mech without punishing you too badly if you fail at first, due to being able to absorb incoming fire better than most support mechs. A cheaper alternative to the Vindicator is the Panther. Much more a dedicated support mech, the Panther also depends on a PPC as its main damage and as its means to provide long-range support. It is still well armored for its weight, allowing it to absorb some damage, but when it comes down to it, both in protection and firepower, the Panther is better suited for lighter weight engagements. Going up in price, the Griffin can also be another possible alternative and a likewise well-armored mech. The Griffin in its standard variant is a support mech through and through. Only having long-range weapons, it can be vulnerable at close ranges, making it a more challenging mech to command effectively, as positioning is vital. Also, the heavier weight means that although it provides more long-range firepower than the Vindicator, damage per ton-wise, it is one of the worst performers in its class. To finish off the list, I thought it would be nice to add a mech that was a possible upgrade path further down the line into the heavyweight class. The 70-ton Grasshopper has a walking movement of 4 and running of 6, which is average for its class, aided by a jumping movement of 4. Armed with a large laser, 4 medium lasers, and an LRM-5, the Grasshopper does not have spectacular damage per ton numbers with a max of 0.47 and adjusted score of 0.44, but is respectable enough to serve a frontline role. Armor protection is good with an armor per ton score of 2.97. Its resilience and ability to keep fighting despite heavy damage has earned the Grasshopper the moniker of Zombie Mech. Heat efficiency is outstanding for a heavy mech at 100%. Grasshopper can continuously fire all its weapons as long as it is not moving without ever having to worry about heat, making up for its lower damage per ton numbers somewhat. Not much else can be said about the Grasshopper. Jump jets make it a mobile mech for its weight, and it is a durable mech that can keep up a steady stream of fire. All points that make it easy to recommend to a less experienced player. Its weapons are geared more for close-range engagements, but the large laser and LRM-5 at least allow it to reach out while closing with the enemy. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this video. I hope that the information I have provided here helps newer players in the selection process of which mechs to bring to those first few battles until you get a larger grasp of the tactics and greater systems at play. I welcome the thoughts or comments from any experienced players on advice for those players that are new or do not have a lot of experience with BattleTech and the mechs they should choose. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. This is Mechs signing out.